Well, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has brought to light the many contrasts between life in democratic Ukraine versus the dictatorship of Putin's Russia. But one that may go overlooked is Ukraine's commitment to religious diversity and freedom. Home to both Ukrainian and Russian Orthodox Church, a rapidly growing Protestant population, as well as a Catholic presence and a Jewish minority that all peacefully coexist. Ukraine offers a stark contrast in a region of the world often known for religious violence and persecution. Now, the question is, could this have been a factor in Putin's invasion of his neighboring country? Joining me now to discuss this and more is Eric Patterson, Executive Vice President of the Religious Freedom Institute. Eric, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me today.
You know, we've seen the religious intolerance of Russia grow over the last decade. And in fact, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which I serve on, has been recommending for some time that Russia be declared a country of particular concern. Is there concern, Eric, that religious hostility has and will spill over into Ukraine?
Tony, thanks for your service on the U.S. Commission. It's an important body. And it is true, and we can talk about it if you'd like, that Russia has a uniquely hostile view towards religious minorities in the country. When it comes to Ukraine, yes, this is a concern in a variety of ways. One is simply that we've seen attacks, bombs dropped, churches destroyed in eastern parts of Ukraine already. But over time, what we've seen is Russia, if it exerts control in an area, that it starts to squeeze out those religious minorities because it doesn't see them as having full allegiance to Moscow. And that's a problem with authoritarians everywhere.
So, Eric, let me go back to the original question. Could this have been a factor in Vladimir Putin? I mean, you have Ukraine there, a prosperous democratic society, and I'm sure you've read the research, you've been a part of actually producing the research, that religious freedom is really fundamental to economic freedom, domestic tranquility. Could this have been a concern of Vladimir Putin, this contrast right there at his own border?
I think that that's exactly right. I don't necessarily think he was thinking theologically or spiritually, but what he saw next door in Ukraine was a type of threat. And the threat was this: a growing young democracy founded on freedom of religion first and foremost. It's the only country in its region that has this type of religious denominationalism. Like you said, lots of different groups living pluralistically and side by side with an allegiance to something that's higher than the state, no established government-controlled church, and the way that that's tied up with good citizenship, freedom of speech, the right to assemble, government not controlling private property. That bundle of liberties is rooted first and foremost in religious freedom, and that is the foundation for a stable democracy. And so a country that was under Moscow's sway in the past, and that Putin has literally lost control of over the past 8 years, he can't shape it like he can Belarus or elsewhere. That is a type of threat, not to his national security, but to his authority in his near abroad.
And you, as you pointed out, this is not theoretical in terms of this might happen. It's a possibility, but it's already happening in Crimea and other places in Ukraine that Russia has moved into. Now, we haven't paid a whole lot of attention to this because our attention has been more in the Middle East. We've been looking at Syria, Iraq, and the question is, will this become, if they succeed, if Russia succeeds, could this be a further nail in the coffin, if you will, of religious freedom in Eastern Europe?
Well, it certainly would go that way. And let me explain just how this happens in Russia and how it could happen in places that he were to control, say, if he took over a large chunk of Ukraine. In Russia, groups that are outside of the Russian Orthodox Church can be persecuted under Russia's draconian counterterrorism law. So if you bring a foreign pastor or missionary or guest speaker to your evangelical church in Russia, you can be fined, and your church leaders can actually be imprisoned for multiple years for breaking the counterterrorism law by having a non-Russian come to your country and speak at your church. These laws are used to bully smaller religious groups, the most notable being the Jehovah's Witnesses. Half of the
Mhm.
people in Russian prisons for their religious faith under this counterterrorism law, over 200, are Jehovah's Witnesses. And why are they a threat to Moscow? Well, they're seen as un-Russian, but what the strategy is bully the little groups and send a message to the Baptists and to the Assemblies of God and the Methodists and the others. None of you are wanted here. That could easily happen in eastern Ukraine if controlled by Russia.
Is it the Jehovah's Witness have been a disproportionate focus of Russia? Is it because, as you point out, they're a small group and they're one that really doesn't push back? They're not organized like some of the other denominations?
Well, I do think that the smaller groups, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, are less likely to have large constituencies, say, for instance, like Southern Baptists in the US, who could mobilize public opinion. But I think that also what this shows us is the playbook for the Kremlin, and that is Putin, since the late 1990s, has seen the need for some sort of muscular Russian identity and nationalism. And so he's mixed up cultural motifs from the past with religious symbols and the history of Russian greatness to try to create a new Russian identity in the 21st century. And anything that looks like it's outside of those lines, he will target.
So, Eric, is the best thing we could do here in the United States is advocate for religious freedom around the globe for all people of all faiths, especially as we look to Eastern Europe.
I think that that's exactly right. That for people who are concerned about the spread of the gospel or the spread of their own faith tradition, that religious freedom allows for that. It allows for people to act on their own conscience. It's also in the interest of the United States to have as much freedom as possible. People will typically choose law and order. They'll choose representative government. They'll choose human rights and all of the other rights when they have religious liberty first and foremost. And so, in a sense, as Tom Farr says, it's a weapon of peace.
That's right. It is a fundamental freedom that should be protected for all people. Eric, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate the great work you guys do.
Tony, you're welcome.